He was a man who had everything that money could buy. Tall, confident, and handsome in his own quiet way, he had built an empire from nothing. Every morning he would wake up in his luxurious penthouse with a breathtaking view of the city. The sunlight would stream in through the huge windows, highlighting the elegant furniture and the collection of art that spoke of his refined taste. Despite all the wealth and success, there was one thing that had always remained at the center of his life: his mother. She was a small, gentle woman who had raised him alone after his father had passed away when he was very young. She was the reason he had worked so hard, the reason he believed in love, loyalty, and family above everything else. Over the years, he had tried to balance his high-powered career with the warmth and care of home life. His mother, now in her 70s, lived with him in the same penthouse. Though she had slowed down with age, her spirit remained sharp. She cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his old stories, and was always there to offer comfort or advice. To him, she was more than a mother. She was a guiding star, a source of wisdom and unconditional love. Life, however, had a way of adding unexpected chapters. It was during a lavish charity event that he first met her. She was striking, elegant, and confident. Her smile lit up the room, and she had a charm that drew people to her naturally. He found himself fascinated, not just by her beauty, but by the way she carried herself, the way she could make anyone feel important in her presence. He had never been easily impressed, yet something about her made him feel lighter, happier, as if he had found a missing piece in his life. They began to meet frequently. What started as casual dinners and walks in the park turned into long conversations that lasted late into the night. He learned about her dreams, her experiences, and the small quirks that made her unique. She seemed genuinely interested in his life as well, asking about his mother, his work, and his childhood. He appreciated the effort, and slowly trust began to grow. It wasn't long before he introduced her to his mother. He had prepared for this moment carefully, wanting the meeting to be perfect. His mother, of course, welcomed her with polite smiles and soft words. She observed her quietly, noting the grace in her gestures, the careful attention she paid to every detail, and the enthusiasm in her voice. At first glance, she appeared to be everything he could have hoped for. The two women spent hours talking, laughing over small memories and shared experiences. It was a scene of warmth and connection, one that brought him immense joy. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened. He found himself thinking about her constantly, imagining a future together. They traveled to exotic destinations, dined in the finest restaurants, and attended glamorous events. Everyone around them seemed to approve. Friends would comment on how well they matched, how her presence seemed to soften his intensity, making him more approachable, more human. She, in return, often spoke about admiration for his work ethic, his vision, and the love he had for his mother. On the surface, it was a story of perfection, but life, as he was beginning to realize, was never as simple as it seemed. The first cracks appeared in small, almost unnoticeable ways. One evening, he returned home to find that she had changed the arrangement of the living room without asking. She had removed photographs of his mother's younger days, subtly replacing them with modern art pieces. When his mother commented on it, asking why the pictures were moved, she had smiled politely but replied with a hint of impatience. "We need to modernize the space," she had said lightly. His mother had not protested, only giving a small sigh, a signal of her quiet endurance. Another evening, during a casual dinner, she made a joke about his mother's habits. It was meant to be playful, but the tone was sharp, the laughter slightly forced. His mother, always gracious, smiled politely, yet he noticed the slight tightening of her lips, the brief look of hurt in her eyes. He felt a flicker of discomfort, but he convinced himself that he might be overreacting. Perhaps it was just a joke, an awkward attempt at humor. Yet the incidents grew more frequent. She would sigh when his mother took longer than expected to serve meals, glance impatiently when she moved slowly around the house, or make offhand comments about old-fashioned routines. It wasn't overt cruelty, but it was enough to make him uneasy. He noticed it, but he also wanted to trust her, to believe that these were just minor misunderstandings that could be smoothed over with time. The turning point came during a quiet afternoon at home. He had been working on an important project and had asked both women to join him for tea. As they sat together in the living room, the fiancé grew visibly irritated when his mother poured tea slowly, carefully measuring each cup. She made a subtle, sharp remark about the process, something that should have been light-hearted but carried a sting. His mother's hands trembled slightly as she continued, her eyes downcast. He felt a surge of protectiveness rise in his chest, a mix of anger and disappointment. After she left, he sat with his mother, gently asking if she was all right. She nodded, brushing off the incident, but he could see the sadness lingering in her expression. For the first time, he realized that charm and sophistication could sometimes mask something darker. He felt torn, caught between the woman he admired and the mother he adored. He didn't want to believe that someone so seemingly perfect could cause his mother pain, yet he could not ignore what he had seen. Despite these moments, life continued with its glittering events and luxurious trips. Friends and colleagues commented on how well they appeared together, how enviable their relationship seemed. He found himself laughing, enjoying her company, and at times forgetting the small signs of discord. But deep down, the unease remained. The feeling that something was not quite right lingered, a subtle shadow over his otherwise bright days. He began to pay closer attention, observing interactions more carefully, listening to the tone of her voice, the choice of words, the subtle expressions that revealed impatience or disdain. He realized that charm could be a mask and smiles could sometimes hide judgment. Each incident he noticed chipped away at the image he had built in his mind, forcing him to confront the possibility that his fiancée might not be as kind-hearted as he had believed. Still, he did not want to jump to conclusions. He loved the idea of her, the hope of companionship and the dream of a partner who could share his life fully. He struggled internally, balancing hope and caution, admiration and suspicion. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience, observation, and emotional clarity. As the weeks passed, the tension grew, subtle but undeniable. He began to notice patterns, how she spoke to his mother, how she reacted when things did not go her way, the way her smile sometimes faltered when she was annoyed. He started documenting incidents in his mind, trying to see if there was a consistent behavior or just occasional lapses. Each observation brought more clarity and more concern. Yet amidst the uncertainty, moments of genuine connection continued to occur. She laughed at his jokes, offered kind words, and occasionally showed tenderness that reminded him why he had been drawn to her in the first place. These moments made the contrast even sharper, highlighting the growing tension between charm and cruelty, love and disrespect. By the end of the first part of the story, he found himself at a crossroads. He had to decide how much he could trust his judgment, how much he was willing to overlook for the sake of love, and how fiercely he needed to protect the woman who had given him life and unconditional care. It was a subtle emotional struggle, one that would shape the choices he made and set the stage for the events that would follow. He knew that the next steps would require wisdom, courage, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. No matter how much he wished life could be simpler, in his heart he knew that love, respect, and family could never be compromised, and that understanding this early would be crucial for what was to come. Life had been moving smoothly in a way that looked perfect to everyone outside, but the billionaire could feel a growing tension underneath the surface. The small signs of disrespect and impatience he had noticed in his fiancée were becoming more frequent. He began to observe her more closely, not wanting to jump to conclusions but unable to ignore the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at him for weeks. He knew he had to pay attention, especially because his mother, gentle and kind, could not always speak up for herself. It started with small incidents that seemed insignificant at first. She would make subtle remarks about his mother's habits, like how she folded the laundry or cooked meals in her own old-fashioned way. Though polite on the surface, the tone carried a sharpness that was hard to miss. One evening, she commented on the way his mother had arranged flowers in the living room, dismissing the effort with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. His mother, ever composed, smiled and thanked her, but he noticed the slight sadness that flickered across her face. The billionaire began keeping track of these moments quietly. He did not want to confront her without clear evidence, and he also wanted to be fair. He remembered all the stories his mother had told him about patience, forgiveness, and the importance of giving people the benefit of the doubt. But he also knew that repeated behavior like this could not be ignored. There was a line between playful teasing and emotional harm, and he was beginning to see that line being crossed more often. One afternoon, he returned from a business trip earlier than expected. The penthouse was unusually quiet. He walked into the kitchen and noticed the fiancé standing over his mother with an impatient look as she demonstrated how to use a new coffee machine. His mother, hands trembling slightly, followed the instructions carefully, but it was clear she was nervous under the critical gaze. When he entered, the fiancé quickly turned to smile, but he caught the tension in the room, the way his mother seemed to shrink back slightly. He decided to wait and observe, not wanting to interrupt immediately. Later, over a cup of coffee, he casually asked his mother how she liked the new machine. She smiled faintly but hesitated, then admitted softly that it was a bit difficult to manage and she sometimes felt rushed. He nodded, feeling a mix of anger and protectiveness. He realized that these small moments, repeated over time, were eroding her comfort and dignity. The billionaire also started noticing the social side of her behavior. When they attended parties or gatherings, she was always charming to the outside world, smiling and interacting as though everything was perfect. But in private, her impatience surfaced. At a dinner with close friends, she whispered a cutting remark about his mother's slow speech, which went unnoticed by others but pierced through the quiet room. He saw his mother's expression falter for a moment before she carefully hid her reaction. That evening, he felt a knot tighten in his chest. How could someone be so kind in public and so critical in private? The tension became more obvious during weekends at home. His mother, who had always enjoyed quiet afternoons tending to her plants or reading by the window, now seemed hesitant, almost cautious. She tried to avoid doing things that might trigger a comment or a sigh from his fiancée. The billionaire watched with growing concern as the woman who had given him everything he had ever known began to shrink in her own home. He felt a deep sense of responsibility and a need to act. One day, while sorting through old family albums, the billionaire noticed the fiancée flipping through the pages impatiently. When his mother shared a story from the past, she barely listened, distracted by her phone or her own thoughts. The billionaire felt his heart tighten. This was the woman who was supposed to be a partner, someone who would respect his mother, someone who would share in the love that had shaped him. Instead, her actions reflected annoyance and indifference. The billionaire decided to test her patience in a subtle way. He asked her to help his mother with a simple household task, something that required time and care. At first she agreed, smiling politely, but soon her frustration became clear. She sighed heavily, made quick movements, and occasionally muttered comments under her breath. His mother remained gentle, patient, and calm, but the difference in attitude between the two women was stark. He could no longer deny that there was a pattern, a consistent disregard for his mother's feelings. The next incident happened during a quiet Sunday brunch. The billionaire had invited a few close friends and their families. His mother was preparing food with care, making sure everything was perfect. The fiancé, however, grew visibly impatient with the process, making offhand remarks about how long things were taking and suggesting faster alternatives. His mother, always gracious, smiled and nodded but clearly felt hurt. Later, the billionaire pulled her aside and asked how she felt about the comments. She smiled, as she often did when trying to hide pain, and said it was nothing, that she didn't want to cause trouble. He felt a rush of protectiveness and a simmering anger. This was no longer about small differences. It was about respect and dignity. The billionaire began having conversations with his mother in private, gently asking about any other incidents she might not have mentioned. She spoke softly, careful not to accuse anyone, but he could see the sadness she had been carrying. It was clear that the fiancé's behavior had been ongoing, not just isolated incidents. She had been undermining his mother subtly, wearing down her confidence and showing impatience when patience was required. He felt a mixture of disappointment, shock, and determination. How could someone he trusted cause the woman who had given him everything to feel diminished? He also noticed that the fiancé's behavior had an effect on the atmosphere of the home. The warmth and ease that had always existed were now tinged with caution and tension. His mother would sometimes retreat to her room earlier than usual, not wanting to interact with someone who made her feel uncomfortable. He felt the responsibility of protecting the sanctity of his home, of ensuring that his mother felt valued, loved, and respected. The balance he had tried to maintain between his romantic relationship and family life was beginning to tip dangerously. Despite these growing concerns, he continued to spend time with the fiancée, trying to understand her perspective. He observed moments when she seemed genuinely kind and considerate, moments when her charm and warmth were real. He wanted to believe in the best of her, to reconcile the outward elegance with the private sharpness, but the evidence kept accumulating. The dismissive comments, the impatient gestures, the subtle undermining of his mother's confidence. Each incident chipped away at the illusion he had held, forcing him to confront an uncomfortable truth. One evening, after another small incident at home, he decided to speak openly with the fiancée. He gently explained that he had noticed her impatience with his mother and asked if she could try to be more understanding. She smiled politely but shrugged it off, saying she didn't mean any harm and that his mother was perhaps too sensitive. The billionaire felt a chill as he realized that she did not see the issue at all, that she considered her behavior normal and acceptable. This was the first clear sign that the problem might not be accidental or occasional. It could be a reflection of her true attitude. From that moment, he became more vigilant. He watched interactions more closely, observed her tone and gestures, and noticed even the smallest expressions of impatience or disdain. He began to plan, not in a dramatic or vengeful way, but with the intention of understanding the full scope of the situation. He needed to know if she was truly capable of respect and kindness, or if this behavior was part of a larger pattern that could not be changed. Meanwhile, his mother continued to carry herself with grace, never expressing anger or bitterness. She remained warm and loving, making the home a safe and comforting place despite the tension that had crept in. Her patience and resilience impressed him deeply, reinforcing his determination to protect her. He felt a growing resolve, a clarity of purpose that made him ready to confront reality when the time came. By the end of this part of the story, the billionaire was no longer uncertain. He knew that the charming, elegant fiancée who had once seemed perfect was showing a side that was hurtful and dismissive. The home that had always been a sanctuary for him and his mother was now a place where caution and tension existed, where one person's impatience threatened to overshadow decades of love and care. He realized that he could no longer ignore the signs, that he would have to take decisive action to protect his family and preserve the respect and dignity that had always been at the heart of his life. He was preparing for a confrontation, a moment when truth would have to be faced and the future of his relationship and his home would be decided. The days that followed were heavy with silence and unspoken tension. The billionaire had started to notice every word, every gesture, every sigh that came from his fiancée. His eyes had opened in a way they hadn't before. He was no longer blinded by the charm that had once drawn him to her. He was observing her with clarity now, and the truth was beginning to form in his mind like a picture he could no longer ignore. His mother, meanwhile, had grown quieter. She moved around the house softly, speaking less, smiling less. Her warmth was still there, but it was dimmed by something unspoken. The billionaire tried to talk to her one evening, asking if everything was all right. She smiled, as she always did, and said she was fine, but he could tell from her eyes that she wasn't. Her once bright spirit seemed to flicker now like a candle in the wind. He realized how much his mother had endured silently, trying not to create trouble between him and the woman he thought he loved. One night he returned home earlier than expected. He had left an important meeting halfway because something inside him told him to come back. As he entered the apartment, he heard voices coming from the living room. His mother's soft tone was there, calm and steady as always, but another voice rose above hers, sharp, impatient, and cold. He paused by the hallway, listening quietly, and what he heard next froze him in place. His fiancée was scolding his mother. Her words weren't loud enough to draw attention, but the tone was unmistakable, disrespectful and cruel in a quiet, cutting way. She was criticizing how his mother had arranged the table, saying it looked old-fashioned and messy. His mother tried to apologize softly, saying she would fix it, but the fiancé's response was dismissive, almost mocking. The billionaire felt a wave of disbelief and anger crash over him. For a moment he could not move. It was as if the air had turned heavy. He took a deep breath, stepped into the room, and forced a calm expression onto his face. The moment his fiancée saw him, her tone changed instantly. The smile returned, her posture straightened, and her voice turned sweet. "Oh, you're home early," she said as if nothing had happened. His mother looked at him, her eyes full of quiet pain but also relief. He gave her a small nod, pretending everything was fine. Inside, however, he was seething. He wanted to confront her right there, but he knew he needed to stay calm. He had learned in business that reacting in anger rarely brought the truth. Instead, he decided to wait and see more, to catch her true nature without warning. He wanted to understand the full picture before making any decisions that could change their lives forever. The next day, he pretended to leave for work as usual, but stayed behind in a separate room with the door slightly open. He listened as his fiancée interacted with his mother. At first her voice was polite and cheerful, but within minutes the sweetness faded. He heard her sighing, making impatient comments and speaking in a tone that dripped with irritation. When his mother asked her a simple question about the household schedule, her response was cold and dismissive. "I already told you that. You should try to remember things," she said sharply. His mother's gentle apology followed, and then the sound of dishes clinking softly, his mother returning quietly to her chores. The billionaire's chest tightened. The truth was now undeniable. The woman he had been ready to marry was treating his mother, the most important person in his life, with arrogance and cruelty. He felt anger rise inside him, but beneath that was heartbreak. He had believed in her so deeply, trusted her charm and kindness, and had imagined building a life together. Now all he could feel was disappointment and betrayal. Later that evening, he decided to speak to his mother again. They sat together in the living room, and after a long silence, he gently asked, "Has this been happening for a long time?" His mother hesitated, her hands folding neatly in her lap. Then in her soft voice, she admitted that it had been going on for months. She hadn't said anything because she didn't want to come between them. She said she hoped things would get better, that maybe the fiancé was just stressed or tired. As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes, and he felt his heart ache. His mother had endured disrespect in her own home just to keep peace for his sake. He reached out, holding her hand firmly. "You should never have to stay silent for me," he said quietly. "You deserve respect every day in every word and gesture." His mother smiled weakly, her eyes filled with love and sadness. "I know, my son," she said, "but sometimes we stay quiet because we love. I didn't want to see you hurt." Those words struck deep inside him. He realized just how much she had sacrificed for his happiness. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake thinking about everything: the way she spoke to his mother, the way she smiled only when others were watching, the way she turned cold the moment she thought no one noticed. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture that was both painful and clear. He knew now that what he had seen and heard could not be brushed aside as stress or misunderstanding. It was real, and it was wrong. Over the next few days, he kept observing quietly. He noticed how she acted differently depending on who was around. When guests or friends visited, she was all charm and sweetness, going out of her way to appear caring and considerate. But once the visitors were gone, her patience vanished. She would make cutting remarks about his mother's habits or criticize her choices with little empathy. He noticed that his mother had started to avoid spending too much time in the same room with her. That hurt him deeply. His home no longer felt peaceful. It had become a place of tension. He began to recall moments from their relationship, times when he had brushed off small signs, thinking they were harmless. The way she occasionally dismissed waiters at restaurants, the impatience in her tone when things didn't go her way, the way she always needed control. Back then he had mistaken it for confidence. Now he saw it for what it truly was: a lack of kindness. Finally, the day came when his patience ran out. He decided to put an end to the pretending. One morning, he told his assistant that he wouldn't be coming to the office. He waited until his fiancée was awake and joined her in the kitchen. She smiled brightly, unaware of what was coming. "Good morning," she said, kissing him on the cheek. He nodded but didn't smile back. His tone was calm when he said, "We need to talk." The change in his voice made her pause. He told her he had heard everything: the way she had spoken to his mother, the disrespect, the coldness behind her polite mask. Her expression froze for a second before she tried to laugh it off. "You must have misunderstood," she said lightly. "Your mother is just too sensitive sometimes. You know how older people can be." He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he looked her directly in the eyes and said, "No, I heard exactly what you said. I saw how you behaved. I can't pretend I didn't." There was a silence so heavy that it seemed to fill the room. Her smile faded. She tried to explain, to shift blame, saying she was under stress or that his mother didn't like her. But he had made up his mind. He told her that no matter what excuses she made, nothing could justify disrespect toward his mother. She stood there for a moment, realizing he was serious. Her tone turned defensive. "So you're choosing her over me?" she snapped. His answer was steady. She's my mother, the woman who gave me everything I have. There is no choice to make. Anyone who disrespects her can't stay in my life." The words hung in the air, final and firm. She realized then that her charm and excuses wouldn't work this time. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The billionaire stood there in silence, his heart heavy but clear. He had made the right choice. When he went to his mother's room later, she was sitting by the window, quietly knitting. She looked up at him and saw the expression on his face. "It's over," he said simply. Her eyes softened and she reached out to hold his hand. "You did what was right," she said. "It's never easy to see the truth, but once you do, you must not close your eyes again." He nodded, feeling both relief and sadness. He knew he had lost something, a dream, an illusion, but he had protected something far more important. That night, as he sat beside his mother at dinner, there was peace in the house again. The silence was no longer heavy. It was calm, comforting, and full of quiet love. He knew this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where truth and respect would guide every choice he made. The experience had taught him something he would never forget, that real love isn't measured by beauty, wealth, or charm, but by how someone treats the people who matter most when no one else is watching. The days after the confrontation were strangely quiet. The air in the penthouse felt lighter, calmer, as if a storm had passed. Yet beneath that calm, the billionaire felt a deep ache, a mixture of disappointment, sadness, and relief. He had ended his engagement with a woman he once believed he would spend his life with. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful right away. It was heavy with reflection. His mother moved gently around the house, never saying much about what had happened, but her eyes held understanding. She knew her son's heart was hurting even if he didn't say it. He spent long hours in his study looking out over the city skyline. His thoughts wandered to the past months, the laughter, the smiles, the public admiration. So many moments had looked perfect from the outside. Now he realized how much of it had been a show. He wondered how he had missed the signs, how he could have been so blinded by charm. But more than anything, he felt gratitude that he had seen the truth before it was too late. The woman he almost married had shown him what she truly valued, and it wasn't love or respect. Word of the broken engagement spread quickly among his friends and colleagues. People were curious but careful with their questions. Some assumed it was a simple disagreement or that he had changed his mind about marriage. He didn't bother explaining the real reason. The truth was too personal, too painful to share with people who wouldn't understand. Only his closest friends noticed that something deeper had happened. They saw the quiet sadness in his eyes and the way he avoided social events for a while. His mother tried to lift his spirits. She would bring him tea in the evenings, sit beside him, and talk about anything that could distract him from his thoughts. Sometimes they spoke about the old days, how they used to live in a small apartment, how he used to dream big even when he had nothing. Those memories grounded him. They reminded him of what truly mattered. Every time he looked at his mother, he was reminded that real love came without conditions. It was patient, gentle, and selfless. A few weeks later, he began returning to his normal routine. Work helped him stay focused. Meetings, projects, and travel filled his days again. But something in him had changed. He was no longer as easily impressed by appearances or grand gestures. He had become more observant, more aware of people's true intentions. When someone spoke to him, he didn't just listen to their words, he watched their tone, their eyes, their behavior toward others. One evening, he attended a charity dinner, his first social event since the breakup. The hall was filled with familiar faces, and the conversations buzzed with laughter and luxury. Everyone welcomed him warmly, pretending not to mention the recent split, though he could sense the whispers. He smiled politely, handling every question with grace. But deep down, he wasn't there to impress anyone. He was simply there to move forward, to show himself that he could stand tall again. As the night went on, he found himself talking to an older gentleman who was speaking about family and values. The man said something that stayed with him. We often measure people by how they treat us, but the real measure is how they treat those who can do nothing for them. Those words echoed in his mind long after he left the event. That was exactly what had gone wrong in his relationship. He had fallen for someone who treated him well when it benefited her, but had no kindness for the one person who represented love without gain. At home, his mother welcomed him with her usual warm smile. She had cooked his favorite meal, as she often did when she sensed he needed comfort. Over dinner, they spoke about the event, about his friends, and about life in general. He told her about the quote he had heard, and she smiled softly. "It's true," she said. "Kindness is not about grand gestures. It's about small acts done with love." In the following weeks, he began to notice subtle changes in himself. He started spending more time with his mother, joining her for walks in the park or simply sitting with her while she watched her favorite shows. He realized how much peace he found in those ordinary moments. His mother's presence reminded him of a kind of love that didn't demand anything in return. It was steady, pure, and honest. Yet, despite the comfort of family, the world outside had its own way of stirring things. The woman he had broken up with tried to reach out again. She sent messages, left calls unanswered, and even sent flowers with notes that spoke of misunderstanding and regret. He read them all but never replied. He knew what she was trying to do, to win him back through charm and guilt. But he had seen too much to be fooled again. Still, part of him wondered whether people could change. Could she truly have realized her mistake? Could she learn to be kind, to respect others? He wanted to believe in the goodness of people, but trust, once broken, could not be repaired so easily. He talked about it with his mother one evening, asking if she thought people could change. She looked thoughtful for a moment and then said, "People can change, yes, but not everyone chooses to. Real change comes from remorse, not regret." Her words stayed with him. One morning, while having breakfast, his assistant informed him that his former fiancée wanted to meet. She had requested one last conversation. He thought about it for a long time. His first instinct was to refuse, but a part of him wanted closure, to hear her side without anger or bitterness. So he agreed to meet her in a quiet cafe far from the city center. When she arrived, she looked different. There was less confidence in her posture, and her smile seemed forced. They greeted each other politely, and after a few moments of silence, she began to speak. She admitted that she had made mistakes, that she hadn't realized how her behavior had hurt his mother. She said she had been under pressure to impress, that she had felt insecure about fitting into his world. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. He listened quietly, not interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I appreciate that you came to say this," he said. "But respect isn't about understanding someone's world, it's about kindness. You don't need money or power to treat someone well." She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. For the first time, she seemed genuinely remorseful. But he knew that even if her words were sincere, trust could not simply return. Some things, once broken, stay that way. They parted on civil terms, without anger or harsh words. As he watched her walk away, he felt a strange sense of calm. It was over, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He had learned what he needed to learn. He had found the strength to walk away from something that didn't align with his values. That was enough. When he returned home, his mother was sitting in the garden tending to her flowers. She looked up as he approached, her gentle smile welcoming him as always. He sat beside her, taking in the peace of the moment. "Did you meet her?" she asked softly. He nodded. "It's finished now," he said. "I just wanted to hear her out." She placed her hand on his arm. "You did the right thing," she said. "Sometimes closure is not about forgiving others. It's about forgiving yourself for trusting the wrong person." Her words made him smile. He realized that while he had been hurt, he was also stronger now. He had learned to see people for who they truly were, to value sincerity over charm, and to protect the peace of his home and heart. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. The house was warm again, filled with laughter and small, meaningful conversations. He invited old friends over, hosted family dinners, and even started visiting community projects his company supported. He found joy in giving back, in seeing smiles on faces that had nothing to do with wealth or status. His mother often accompanied him, and together they found new happiness in simple things. The billionaire had come to understand that life's biggest lessons often come from pain. Losing someone who doesn't value you is not a loss, it's a form of protection. He learned that love must always be built on respect, not appearance or convenience. And most importantly, he realized that his mother's quiet wisdom had guided him through everything. Her patience, her grace, and her ability to forgive had been the light that led him out of the darkness. As the sun set one evening, he sat on the balcony beside her, watching the city lights flicker below. The air was calm, the world quiet. For the first time in a long while, his heart felt at peace. He turned to his mother and said softly, "You were right about everything. Love isn't about what people say. It's about what they do when no one is watching." She smiled, her eyes glistening with pride. "And now you've seen it for yourself," she said. He nodded, realizing how far he had come. That night he understood something simple but powerful, that real happiness didn't come from grand gestures or perfect relationships. It came from honesty, kindness, and the people who stood by you when the rest of the world faded away. Time passed quietly after the storm of heartbreak and discovery. The billionaire's life slowly settled into a new rhythm, one that was calmer and far more grounded. The days were no longer filled with the noise of parties, public attention, or fancy plans. Instead, they were filled with purpose and peace. He found comfort in simplicity, something he had forgotten when he became surrounded by luxury and high expectations. His mornings began early now. He would have breakfast with his mother, who always waited for him at the dining table with a gentle smile. They would talk about everything from work to small funny things that happened in the neighborhood. Sometimes she teased him about how serious he still looked when reading the morning newspaper. It was those small moments that made him realize how lucky he was to still have her by his side. After breakfast, he would drive to his office, not in one of his expensive cars, but in a modest one he hadn't used for years. His employees noticed the change in him. He seemed calmer, more approachable, and more thoughtful during meetings. He listened more, smiled more, and treated everyone with even greater respect than before. His experiences had humbled him in a way no business loss or victory ever could. One afternoon, his mother came to visit him at work. It wasn't something she did often, but that day she brought homemade food for his entire office. His staff was surprised but delighted. She walked around greeting people warmly, and the atmosphere in the office shifted instantly. Laughter filled the room as everyone shared lunch together. The billionaire watched from his desk for a while, smiling to himself. It reminded him how much joy simple acts of kindness could bring. Later he joined her and said, "You always have a way of making people feel at home wherever you go." She smiled and replied, "It's not hard to make people happy. You just need to see them as people, not positions." Her words touched him deeply. He had built an empire, but his mother continued to teach him the most valuable lessons about life. In the months that followed, he began spending more time on community work. He started a program to support elderly people living alone, inspired by how much his mother valued family and care. Every weekend, he would visit one of the community centers, talk to the elders there, and listen to their stories. Many of them reminded him of his mother, wise, patient, and full of stories about times when love and respect mattered more than money. His mother often joined him on these visits, and together they became known for their warmth and humility. People admired how, despite his wealth, he treated everyone like an equal. There was no arrogance in his voice, no distance in his presence. He had become a man who led with compassion rather than power. But life always had a way of testing people even when things seemed peaceful. One day, while at the community center, he ran into someone unexpected, his former fiancée. She was volunteering there, helping distribute meals. Their eyes met for the first time since their last conversation months ago. For a moment, the air felt heavy as old memories resurfaced. She walked over, hesitant but polite. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly. He smiled politely and replied, "Neither did I. It's good to see you doing something meaningful." She nodded, looking down for a moment before saying, "I've been trying to change. I realized I needed to be a better person, not for anyone else but for myself." He listened quietly. There was no anger in him, no bitterness left. He simply nodded. "I hope you find peace," he said sincerely. She gave a small smile and replied, "I already have in small steps." They talked for a few more minutes about the work they were doing and then went their separate ways. It was a short meeting, but it brought closure in a different way, a gentle reminder that time can heal what anger cannot. When he told his mother about it later, she simply said, "Sometimes life brings people back not to stay, but to show how far you've both come." He knew she was right. The encounter didn't stir old emotions. Instead, it brought a quiet sense of gratitude. He was grateful that his path had changed, that he had chosen peace over pride. Over time, his relationship with his mother grew even closer. They spent evenings together watching the sunset from their balcony, often sharing stories about his childhood. She would remind him of how he once promised to buy her a big house when he grew up, and he would laugh, saying, "And you ended up getting more than one." But she always told him that none of the houses mattered. What mattered was that he never forgot where he came from. One evening, as they sat outside sipping tea, his mother grew quiet for a while. Then she said, "You've done so much, but promise me one thing. Never let success make you forget kindness." He smiled and said, "I promise, Mother." That simple conversation stayed with him for years. It became his guiding principle in every decision he made afterward. Months later, his company launched a new foundation in his mother's name. It was dedicated to helping elderly people who had no family support. The opening ceremony was simple but beautiful. His mother stood beside him, her eyes full of pride as she cut the ribbon. The media covered the event, praising the billionaire for his generosity, but he didn't care about the attention. All he cared about was the look of joy on his mother's face. As time went on, he began mentoring young entrepreneurs. He didn't just teach them about business strategies, but also about empathy and integrity. He told them stories from his own life, about how wealth and status mean nothing if you lose your humanity. His story became an example of how personal pain could turn into purpose. Through it all, his mother remained his closest companion. Even in her old age, she continued to inspire him every day. Sometimes she would sit by the window knitting or reading, and he would look at her with quiet admiration. He often thought about how her strength and love had shaped him into the man he had become. Years later, when she passed away peacefully in her sleep, it felt like the world had paused for him. The house felt empty without her laughter, her voice, her warmth. But instead of drowning in grief, he chose to honor her memory through action. He expanded the foundation, making it one of the largest elderly care networks in the country. Every year on her birthday, he would visit the centers and personally spend the day with the people she cared so deeply about. He never remarried. It wasn't because he didn't believe in love anymore, but because he had found a different kind of fulfillment. His mother's love had shown him that relationships should bring peace, not pain. He had learned that family wasn't always about blood. It was about the people who stayed by your side through every storm. One day, many years later, while sitting in his office surrounded by photos of his mother and the people they had helped, he realized something profound. His mother's kindness had not only saved him from heartbreak, but it also shaped the legacy he would leave behind. Everything he had built was rooted in the lessons she had taught him, the value of compassion, respect, and humility. He stood by the window, looking out at the city he had once seen only as a place of ambition. Now it looked different to him, a place filled with lives, stories, and emotions. He smiled quietly, thinking of his mother's favorite saying, "Success means nothing if your heart is empty." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the skyline, he whispered softly, "Thank you, Mother." It wasn't just gratitude for raising him, it was gratitude for showing him what truly mattered. The peace he felt in that moment was something no amount of money could buy. In the years that followed, his story became one that inspired many. People admired him not only for his wealth, but for the way he used it, with heart, with purpose, with humility. And every time someone asked him what shaped his life the most, he always gave the same answer: "My mother." Through loss, love, and lessons, he had learned that real happiness isn't found in grand gestures or glittering success. It's found in small acts of kindness and forgiveness and in the quiet strength of those who love you selflessly. And as long as he lived, he carried her spirit with him, a gentle reminder that the richest people are not those with the most money, but those with the most love in their hearts.